Tell me, friend, why is it that when we're awake, a dream is an aspirational longing, something you've chosen to devote time to? But when you close your eyes, the definition shifts, and a dream is something that chooses you, deep from within your subconscious, a ride with no escape until you're graced with waking. Now, I know you're busy, but if you have the time, would you please allow me to share with you the story of the first time I died in a dream? It was moving day. A large house had been sectioned off into apartments for poor folk like me. It was incredibly Coraline-esque. In fact, my subconscious probably committed creative theft. The house was large and filled with intricate decor. Crown moldings sculpted into the shape of curling leaves and twisting roots spanned the length of the ceiling, the whole thing organic and almost breathing. The windows were tall, letting in brilliant light onto the naked floor, marking it with the shadows of the ornate leaf patterns from the thin metal bars protecting the windows. It was a beautiful and empty shell. It was a mere echo of what had once been and never would be again, its grandeur tainted by the tiny kitchen shoved in a corner, with the only furniture in the room being a brass bed frame with a bare mattress. I felt small. It almost seemed as if all the outer decor was curling around me, trying to keep me there, to fill the hole that had been left behind. There was a small attic door in the wall, which had been painted over in the same decayed beige that had once been white. I didn't really think about it until the sun had set, and the air had become cold, and a mewling cry arose, muffled, from the other side of that door. I stumbled out of bed, which now had a lone blanket, and tried to open the door in the dark, my heart thumping in my ears. It was locked, but more importantly than that, there was a cat on the other side. I ran to the landlord's room, for he too lived in the house, and coincidentally, he also was awake at midnight. I explained the situation to him, and he told me not to worry. Apparently, this sort of thing had happened before, with another tenant, and he'd hired someone to check it out, and the sound was merely the wind moving through the pipes and walls and whatnot. "It's just an old house," he said, patting me on the shoulder, his hand unwelcome and heavy. I wasn't sure why, but his smile was off-putting. Something about his eyes reminded me of a bird in an unsettling way. They were large and deep-set, and he didn't blink very often. They felt predatory and a little too watchful. I smiled and asked for the key just so I could make sure, and he told me he didn't have one for that space since it was unused. I thanked him quickly and booked it back to my place. I've been called a fool many times, and in certain situations it most definitely applies, but I know what a cat sounds like, and there was most certainly a cat behind that wall. So naturally, I did what anyone would do. I broke the seal with a ruler and the lock with a boot. It swung open to fathomless darkness. I could see only by the window's starlight, on account of my lack of a flashlight. I stared at the blackness, and the goosebumps on my neck told me that it was looking back. No way in hell was I going in there. I called to the cat, half expecting the poor thing to come running out of the darkness. Like when you take pity on a stray in the cold and they zip in, but not everyone's a people cat. "Here, kitty, kitty." After my voice was made clear, the cat came towards me. My first thought was, he's scared, but not of me. My second, the landlord lied. And the third was, this cat is far too junky to be a stray. I shut the door, fed the cat half a can of tuna, and waited for morning. Now, as much Coraline energy as this house had, I knew cats couldn't magically appear and disappear. There must have been a hole or something that allowed him to have gotten in there, and he must have somehow gotten stuck. If it was left unchecked, surely more cats would be in danger. But the night was dark, and that crevice darker. When the sun arose and left me feeling less paranoid, I opened it up again, this time armed with a flashlight. It was a dream, so I'm not clear on where it came from or why I hadn't used it the night before, but I suppose, like my waking mind, my subconscious is also one for the dramatics. The cat sat on the windowsill, basking in the light as I entered the darkness. The crawl space was a tall, thin, wooden area, which, creepily enough, had doors into most of the rooms. However, aside from my door, all but 2 of them were sealed. This hardly made me feel any better. I set about looking for holes, my throat tightening as I continued to find none. I prayed for a hole, some crevice that only a cat could manage to squeeze through, some evidence that there was nothing to worry about, that there was no human activity behind this, that there was nothing looming behind me, that I was safe, that the whirling in my mind was wrong. I found 2 holes. If you got up on the ladder, which rested precariously against the wall, and clearly didn't belong, the holes were by one of the unsealed doors, each hole big enough, not for a cat, but for an eye. A human eye. The metal of the ladder was cold against my hand. A chill traveled down my spine. Dread built up within me, filling my neck with tension as I moved to peer into those holes. This experience was much like wading into a lake. You don't really notice when the water is waist deep, or even chest deep, but as soon as it gets to the head, it all becomes too real. That's when it's hard. That's when you can't breathe. That's when you remember all the things that can hurt you, which you are completely and utterly surrounded by. That's when you drown. For a moment, you open your eyes in the water and you see nothing, but you know there is something, and the fact that you don't see it makes it worse. Peering through the holes, I saw a room like mine, except where I was empty, this place was full. Paintings of a flourishing forest filled the walls. A swing hung from the center of the circular room. Plants and lights populated the walls. Everything was full and warm and bright. My stomach rolled, and I wanted to throw up. Because this was a home. The books piled under the bed belonged to someone. The scattered papers scrawled with ink with someone's thoughts. The clothes tossed at a wicker laundry basket was someone's chosen portrayal to the world. And this room was where that was shed for authenticity, comfort, and safety. And behind a grate, at the bottom of the floor, was 2 holes too small for a cat. I slid down from the ladder, ran into my room, and moved to slam the tiny door. But I paused and gently closed it. The cat stared at me. His marble green eyes told me that he belonged in the home which had been invaded. I stared at him, and my hazel eyes told him of my unnerved fear. It didn't scare him, or at least he didn't show it, when he hopped down from the sill and moved to comfort me. He pressed beneath my shaking, cold hands, his body soft and warm. He let me hold him, and in doing so, he held me. By counting the doors in the crawl space and going off the floor plan, it wasn't particularly hard to find the proper entrance to that home. It was, however, hard to raise my hand against the thick door and relate my suspicions that said door was not as effective as one would hope. But I did it. The wooden door fell away, and words left my mind because the woman standing in front of me was me. Not in the traditional sense that we shared a face or personality, but in the dream sense that I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I was her at a different time, or perhaps in a different space. She was a part of me, or perhaps I a part of her. I'm not sure how to explain how we were connected, but it's sort of akin to a time traveler meeting a past self. We existed and were the same yet split in 2. I knew it, she knew it, and the cat knew it. She smiled, for she had been looking for the cat. It was in this part of my dream that my focus fell away from the scene of a girl explaining a terrible invasion to another girl, but my frame focused instead on the swing in the middle of the room. A breeze from the open window pushed it ever so slightly. It rocked gently as both girls, familiar strangers, embraced, each comforting the other, even though there was no comfort to give. Solid and warm, with the protection of company, the cat watched idly from the kitchen countertop. The girl, whose name I didn't need to know and never did, wanted to tell the landlord. I was fairly certain that that was the very man who was defiling her privacy and wanted to go straight to the cops. The cat agreed with me, so that's what we did. As it turned out, the only other entrance that was open came from the landlord's office, and the cops found some of her belongings at his place. He was sent to holding while they figured out his sentencing. We remained at the house. Each of us spent a great deal of time in the other's apartment, not wanting to be alone. Rebuilding security and a sense of normality, we played games together and sang. We even read alone in the same room, hungry for closeness and the comfort of having someone else be on watch so you can relax. We were in her room. She sat at her vanity, the same old white as the walls, covered in sculpted vines. She was putting on makeup for the joy of creating something beautiful and fleeting. I sat on her bed reading a book about an old house. It was warm and quiet until the cat began hissing. I looked up in time to see my friend scream. Her eyes were large with fear, her arms flung toward me as if she could stop the axe that I felt rip into the back of my head. I fell forward, dead, eyes open, watching. She ran, and the landlord, who must have gotten in through the walls, chased her, the cat slowing him down only long enough for the man to end his life. I lay on the bed, eyes glazed, hand outstretched to the body of my dear cat friend, watching, incapable of helping. The house was beautiful, even stained with the color of life. I looked again to the swing, which rocked not with the gentle wind, but with the force of my friend's body as she fell, his second axe through her chest. The man followed her, his throat open. I wondered if perhaps we were all the same person. And then the house's swirling leaves, roots and walls swallowed us, keeping us for itself, drowning us in its ornate distractions from the bareness of its walls, trying desperately to fill its emptiness. And all that was left was silence. My tale's at an end, I suppose. Well, thank you for listening. I had to tell someone. I'm glad that someone was you. Be well, my friend. Be well.